Hello, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. My name is Joey Lopes, and today I am joined by Connor.
Hey, Joey.
Nice bit. And Mark.
Hello.
So that was Connor snapping, if you guys couldn't tell. I don't know. I guess that came through pretty clearly.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
It's going to come out great.
it's going to come out great. So we're here recording on Election Day, so I hope that both of you guys voted. I, of course, voted. I'm going to tell you what I voted for.
Sure, I did.
I voted for
Yeet?
I voted for Twin Peaks: The Return. Oh, did you guys think I was talking about the election? Ha ha. I was talking about the really, really dumb best movie of all time Twitter poll that's happening at the moment. And people are getting really, really angry at it because Twin Peaks Season 3, Twin Peaks: The Return, is on there. And people are like, it's a TV show, it shouldn't be there. And
It
I'm
is the
just
best
like,
movie of all time, though.
I'm sorry, it's the best thing that's ever happened, but you gotta vote for it. So I very unapologetically cast my ballot for a television show for best movie of all time. But hopefully that should give you an idea about why we have finally gotten to the end of what we've been doing for the past month and now bleeding into the next month.
Yeah,
which
I'm sure
is-
that'll be the main thing that dominates Twitter these days.
Yeah, I hope so. Our David Lynch retrospective. This is
Yes,
the
yes.
last episode of our David Lynch retrospective. We've gone a long way. I think at this point we've now seen every single David Lynch movie between the three of us. So that's pretty cool. It's been a long time coming, I think.
Have either of you
And,
guys seen Dune?
I have not. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
but-
lied, Joey.
So we're not
Dune,
counting
like Dune. Dune counts but doesn't count at the same time. Like it's kind of a weird gray area there. But I guess that is sort of a blip, or that we'll have to fix at some point.
Gotta rectify that.
But really, we're here today to finish out the retrospective, to talk mainly about David Lynch's last feature film, which is the 2006 movie Inland Empire. Now, Inland Empire is kind of a what's the word for it? I think even like people that are like big David Lynch fans, like people that really like David Lynch, if there's one David Lynch movie they might not have seen, it's probably this one. And there's a few reasons for that. Not only because it has kind of a strange distribution, like kind of format where, unlike typical movies which are distributed on home video by like, whatever studio financed it or whatever, David Lynch apparently owns the rights to the distribution of Inland Empire, and the movie came out on DVD shortly after it was, released or came out in theaters or whatever. And I don't think there's been very many re-releases of it since then, and it's not available on any streaming services. So it's kind of hard to find. You gotta do some digging, but eventually, if you're savvy enough, I'm sure you can do it. I believe in you. We found it, and we watched it. And Inland Empire is a little bit infamous, even among like the big David Lynch fans. It's a 3-hour experimental,
Highly
film,
experimental.
that was shot entirely on like
Not the best.
the
Early
consumer-grade digital video. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Early consumer grade.
it's kind of an interesting like history there, because around like the 2000s, like kind of in that like turn of the century, we had this big change in Hollywood where we're starting to see digital cameras replacing film cameras for our filmmaking and just like movies in general, because the process of shooting digitally is less cumbersome and not necessarily cheaper, but perceived to be cheaper. And because the digital cameras were starting to get really good and the picture quality was starting to get close to something resembling film, at least to the untrained eye, movie studios were starting to pivot in that direction. By this point, this is 2006 when this movie came out. It wasn't quite there yet. Like the biggest movies that had been shot on digital video at that point were, I think, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. both of which were shot at fairly low resolution for what you think of like now. Like I think that Attack of the Clones wasn't even 1080p technically, which is kind of insane. And Revenge of the Sith I think was shot in 1080p. And
So
obviously
even
now
professional grade level stuff was pretty low by today's standards.
exactly. Around this time, like professional grade digital video stuff was not that great. And David
Yeah.
Lynch shot this movie on like a camcorder, basically. So
Yep.
we're
And
talking
a lot of
like,
it he shot. A lot of it he actually shot himself. He was
Yes.
operating
Yeah.
it too.
he was the
Yeah.
one holding the camera. And around this time, like he was really enticed by it because, well, one, he has so much control over it because he can hold the camera. But two, he really liked the kind of grungy, gross look that you get from the digital video camcorders of the time.
It does have that sort of.
Um,
It's not VHS nasty, but it has that kind of appeal to it. I would
Yeah.
say, and I think you mentioned control, the ability to view it immediately,
Yeah.
and also such like precision in editing. You didn't have to wait for the results to come back. Like despite the early aspects of the electronic, like digital filmmaking at the time, it was kind of a revelation to him from what I've read. And he like kind of fell in love with being able to do that, and he's like, I'm never looking back.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think it was in 2012, there was this really good documentary that I think Keanu Reeves produced, and he was the person like asking the interviews and stuff. It was about the difference between film and digital filmmaking, and kind of the transition, and interviewing a lot of filmmakers and how they felt about it. And David Lynch was one of the people who was like, Keanu, don't hold me to this, but I think I'm done with film. And the primary reason just being that digital video ultimately you have more control over what you're doing with digital video, not only in the moment because you can see directly what you're getting like right there while you're shooting it, but also in the editing where there's a lot more flexibility to things you can do with the image compared to film. I think there's a lot of filmmakers that will agree that film itself has a very, very particular texture that is kind of beautiful and wonderful in its own right, and something that is 100% worth preserving. But for a filmmaker like David Lynch, who really loves to have the ability to control things, and the way he describes it is like he wants to continue to dream even after the movie is shot. There's obviously so much potential there in digital video. But the thing that's so fascinating is that with Inland Empire, this wasn't like, a professional grade digital video camera. This really was a it was probably the more like higher end version of the digital video of the time for like consumers, but it was by no means up there. And that's why a movie like this, like getting a Blu-ray release would be like a waste of time. Like you're not going to get
to
any
put it in
benefit out of that.
today's terms, it's sort of like the people that go shooting movies on their iPhone or something, where
It's even less than that.
Yeah, because now you can actually get pretty great results just from an iPhone alone.
Yeah.
This is like, I guess, maybe more potato quality.
Yeah.
Of
And you
camera
notice it
work.
instantly. Like it will remind you of like old home videos, and
The
like
focus is off half the time, I think,
Yeah.
on purpose, maybe.
sometimes there's also a lot of moments that I thought were interesting where like so the digital video cameras, one of the differences between like your standard like consumer digital video like camcorder and like a movie camera is that you don't have interchangeable lenses really. Like you kind of can do it, and I suspect that there are a few shots in this that Lynch somehow managed to get like a different kind of lens on the camera. But the default lens for a camcorder is pretty wide because I think they have like a zoom that can change the focal length, but the default lens is pretty wide angle. So whenever you get really close to somebody, you get like a really distorted image of their face. And there's a lot of shots in this that are like that if you see it, you can just tell that the camera was like right up in their face. And, and it distorts it like dramatically.
Yeah, you can't. It's not like the kind of definition that you can see every pore, but it's like you just are uncomfortably close to certain characters for minutes at a time.
And it works though. That's the point.
I think
it definitely gives that. Yeah.
So we haven't really like talked too much about the movie itself. It's kind of like the background of it. I think we've made a point a lot in this series talking about how David Lynch is really not as inaccessible as people make him out to be. And I think that Inland Empire is like the movie that you don't show somebody if you're trying to make that point.
Yeah, I would say so.
But I want to be very clear that I'm not holding that against the movie. I'm just trying to say that if you want to get into David Lynch and you're not used to strange things, maybe don't watch Inland Empire, because it's 3 hours of very strange things.
If you want a like little excerpt that kind of tells you what you're in for to some degree without giving anything away, here's a quote from his book, A New Way to Work. It's also, I didn't have a script. I wrote the thing scene by scene without much of a clue where it would end. It was a risk, but I had this feeling that because all things are unified, this idea over here would somehow relate to that idea over there. I'll continue. And I was working with a very great company, Studio Canal in France, who believed in me enough to let me find my way. So basically, Lynch had total free reign over the creation of this movie to do literally anything he wanted, and he had none of it planned out in advance. But he's able to play it by ear and improvise and continue building on things. But you're also dealing with unhinged or unleashed Lynch, I guess, in this case. Totally like left to do whatever he wants, and it shows. And I think that might be too much for some people. One recommendation I'd have if I went back and rewatched this video or this movie would be make sure you have the subtitles turned on prior, because the movie doesn't have any qualms about just switching languages on the fly or having people talk really, really quietly. And I had like about half the movie without subtitles, and I was just like, I'll just let it wash over me. I guess I'll just kind of experience it as it comes. But after the third scene of people just kind of talking in, I think, Russian.
I think it was Polish.
Polish. I'm sorry, Polish. The gets a little tough, and also they're actually saying pretty interesting things. I found out after I turned on the subtitles.
It's funny that happened to me and Connor.
I would recommend having the subtitles on, because for whatever reason they didn't just have them baked in for other languages.
Yeah. No, it's definitely make sure that's there. Like I don't think, like, at the end of the day, like I don't think that the subtitles are gonna help you, but they will.
I think you'd enjoy it.
There is more to get out of it with them.
Yeah.
For particularly for those scenes in
unless you speak Polish.
Unless you speak Polish, yes. I think this was actually a co-production with like Poland or something.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
I think part of the sound aspects too is that they a lot of it is just Lynch telling his lead, who is Laura Dern, who does everything with David Lynch pretty much wherever. If he ever has a project and wants Laura Dern for it, she always will do it. And this
there's
is
a funny story with that for this one.
Yeah, you'll have to tell it. So a lot of this is just him following her around with a camera and telling her things to do, because there is no script. You can clearly feel that way, and then the way he parses it together is pretty, pieces it together is pretty impressive. But I think a lot of the reason why the sound is kind of weird too is that they don't have a traditional like microphone setup. Also, you can't hear it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was. I noticed that instantly, where it was like I doubt that this is the case, but I was wondering early on, like, are they recording the dialogue with the onboard camera?
I was
microphone?
wondering, is that is the case then? So,
I don't think they did, because it would sound way worse if they did. But there were a couple of times where I wondered, because the sound, it sounded like if you had the camera far away from two people and they're talking to each other, it sounded like the microphone was in the same places where the camera is, not like right up on the actors, like not with a boom or whatever.
The most stark is when it is right at the beginning too, when they're in the house, in her house, when Grace Zabriskie shows up. Like that's the scene where I noticed that. I was like, wait, are they really just using the?
You can't,
I was wondering, but
you can't hear a thing. There's.
Yeah, it was, but that's all. I'm sure that's all part of like his intent at the end of the day. I mean, David Lynch edited this himself too, right? Like this entire thing is just like unfiltered glimpse at David Lynch's creative process and
Absolutely.
subconscious like thoughts. So like for anybody that's really interested in David Lynch, I think this is kind of like required reading in a sense, because you're getting the direct unfiltered stuff here, and it's got a little bit of everything. It's parts of it are horrifying, parts of it are like completely ludicrous and funny. Parts of it just like you're at a loss for words, to be honest.
I think the sense that permeates the movie more than almost anything else is this feeling of unreality or some kind of mixed reality, where he does this sort of thing. I think the most stark like scenes, the most memorable, are probably the ones where he bait and switches you, where it starts out with two characters talking to each other, and you think they're talking as the characters of Inland Empire for the entire duration of the scene, and then at the end of it, the floor falls out from under you, and it turns out they're actually playing the characters that they're playing in the movie they're shooting in Inland Empire. And that's just like, it happens a couple of times, but it gets you off guard.
And then at some point, it all blends together.
I guess we should say what the movie actually is.
Yeah,
so it's like, I mean, maybe on the loosest terms. Like, I'll read the IMDb description to give that a little context.
Sure.
It just says, as an actress begins to adopt the persona of her character in a film, her world becomes a nightmarish and surreal place. So that's just kind of like what Mark said. So that it's kind of like her experience in the real world is kind of merging with her character. And there's also a whole aspect of that this might be like a cursed script or something that also that came from Poland, which is why the Poland aspect is in there too. So maybe this is kind of like a recurring thing that happens whenever someone tries to recreate this work. But
it's that's funny. The earlier like I'd say like the first half hour or so of the movie is pretty straightforward. Like there's a very clear, like some of the scenes are strange, obviously, but there's a clear story being told, and you can follow it and you get it, and it feels just like a standard kind of David Lynch movie with like a mystery being set up and the same kind of filmmaking techniques, although obviously very, very different from his other films because of how it was shot with the digital video camcorder. But then it's not even really a slow transition.
It just kind of flips.
At some point, the rug gets pulled out from under you, which happens a lot in David Lynch movies. But unlike in something like Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway, where after like a little bit of time, you start to gather like some grounding, and you're like, oh, I kind of see what's happening here. I've come to some understanding. I don't feel like that happens with Inland Empire.
I think
the
so.
rug just keeps getting pulled out from under you.
It just keeps tumbling.
Yeah.
Do you want me to tell you about the origins of how this movie came to be?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so from David Lynch in his own words, when we began, there wasn't any Inland Empire. There wasn't anything. I just bumped into Laura Dern on the street, discovering that she was my new neighbor. I hadn't seen her for a long time, and she said, "David, we've got to do something together again." And I said, "We sure do. Maybe I'll write something for you, and maybe we'll do it as an experiment for the internet." And she said, "Fine." And that's how Inland Empire happened.
Don't you love to hear it? I love.
Sure does seem that way.
I love when
I don't know if this is true, but I get the impression throughout a lot of this where it's just David Lynch told her to show up at a certain place wearing whatever she wanted, and then they started filming. And that's kind of what I feel like happened through this. Like, because she's wearing different things throughout the entire thing, and it kind of goes, it interchanges throughout of just like, I mean, it's supposed to be together, but like,
I feel like there's elements of that. There's elements. You get the sense that like David Lynch just kind of has a, through his production staff and people, they have a pretty good phone book. And they just kind of like called up people to show up. Like William H. Macy is in it for one shot. And Mary Steenburgen shows up at one point as just like a person that shows up at Laura Dern's house. Like there's so many like just famous people that appear in this movie for the briefest time, and you wonder like, did David Lynch just say, "Hey, can you come over for like, a second so I can film you doing something?"
We got coffee.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's a who's who of David Lynch collaborators, and
But then he does
people.
have a lot of people who have like more like integral roles in the film that are big actors too. Like Jeremy Irons is in this, Justin Theroux,
Yeah.
who is like one of his guys, and then Harry Dean Stanton, who is fantastic in this, by the way.
Didn't you have a oh yeah, he's really good. Didn't you have a story about him calling up yeah, you do. You have a story about him calling up people for this particular movie, and it even blew away the producers.
Oh yeah, there was the I think there was just the one story, and this is on Wikipedia, so it's pretty easy to find. But it's just this one story where David Lynch apparently told like one of his producers, like, I need a woman with an amputated leg, a monkey, and a lumberjack by 3:15, and the guy thought he was joking, and Laura Dern was like, "No, that's that's what he wants," and so he got those people by 4:00. And well, there you go. That's what it's like to work with David Lynch. And something in his brain was like, I need this. I need these people here. This is what we need for this scene. And when you watch it, you definitely see those people.
You get every bit of them.
Definitely true. Yeah.
It does. He paid off something earlier in the movie, I think. Kind of with that.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can kind of wrap up with Inland Empire a little bit here, because I kind of want to get a little bit of a final thoughts on this whole David Lynch experience that we've done.
Can I just say one? Can I just bring up the one thing about how David Lynch like campaigned for Laura Dern for this? Yeah. So famously, because they had no money or budget in Hollywood, David Lynch got assigned for-year consideration, because that's what they do. Like when a movie comes out, they make all the for-year consideration things to nominate people for an Academy Award. He got assigned for Laura Dern, and he just sat out in some place in Hollywood. He got a cow, and he has the cow next to him. He's in a director's chair, and he's just sitting there drinking coffee with a giant sign that says "For Your Consideration" with Laura Dern and a picture of her.
And a cow.
And a cow. And a cow right next to him.
Why is the cow there? Because he needed a cow. It's that simple.
Yeah.
She was not nominated. This unfortunately did not work, but it was a lovely attempt.
It got him attention.
It did get him attention. But yeah, well, what can you say? Well, all right, guys. So, Inland Empire came out in 2006, and that is the last feature film that David Lynch has directed. Now, I mentioned like in the very beginning of this episode that there is at least one other major David Lynch work that came out after Inland Empire, which is of course the fabled third season of Twin Peaks, which I think all of us have seen multiple times at this point. Is that safe to say?
I haven't watched it all the way through in one go twice over, but I've watched probably all of it a few times over in bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know me and Connor have definitely watched it a couple of times. So like really this whole story almost feels like it's all building to that, because in a lot of ways, like among a certain subset of person, the third season of Twin Peaks is considered like one of the greatest works of filmed moving images storytelling in definitely of the last like 20 years. And it's the kind of thing that you never thought in your life that you would ever see, and that for those months that we were watching that when it was airing in 2017, it was like every single week was just a revelation of incredible work just coming out at you. And to me, like I love all of David Lynch's movies. I'm not going to say that like this is the best thing he's ever done necessarily, but in a lot of ways, I think that the third season of Twin Peaks is a monumental work of.
Yeah, I'd be willing to call it his magnum opus.
It very well could be. Yeah, I mean it was. So there's a minor bit of controversy in like the dumber sections of the internet where people are like some people are wanting to call the third season of Twin Peaks a film so that it can be on like the top films of the whatever like lists and stuff. And some people are like, you can't do that because it was a television show. And in my opinion, it's like, who cares?
Most TV shows are just really, really long movies these days anyway, but
I mean, yeah,
I don't care. It's the best thing he's made.
The funny thing is that most TV shows are often said, like the people will say, it's like, we're trying to make like a 48-hour movie. You know, like that's what the Game of Thrones people said. But really, they were still producing it like a regular television show episode at a time, right? But
with multiple directors.
Yeah, with multiple different directors and everything. Right. So it's still very much a television production. But the third season of Twin Peaks was actually like just one ridiculously long script that was shot just in sequence. There was no conception of episode breaks when it was shot. That all came later. So it's pretty fascinating how that all came out, especially because the last to me, like, season 3 of Twin Peaks feels very cohesive in the way its episodes are structured.
It does, especially because we did it too. We watched all 18 hours like in a span of 3 days in that theater at the Museum of Modern Art, and it works so well.
Oh yeah,
like just all together.
It's pure magic, and
it's one of those things. I've had this experience 1 or 2 times in my life so far with other medium, where it's like you wonder why you're so jaded about everything else that you've like read, played, watched, and then you finish it because you're watching it and you're like, wait, maybe I really do love movies. And then the series finishes and then you go and watch something else and you're like, nope. It was the magic in there somehow.
Yeah, no, it's enough to reinvigorate your love of any kind of art and media. Honestly, it was just a magical time, and I would recommend it to everybody. I think that it's a very unusual revival for a television show. It's very different from how Twin Peaks was in the 80s. But if you're willing to go along with what it puts out there, I think it's absolutely essential, just an essential piece of media for anybody to watch for recent times. I think it's out of like everything that's been released over the past decade or 20 years or whatever, it's probably it's the thing I would hold up against anything as just an absolutely monumental piece of work. Yeah. So that's David Lynch, guys. We did it. We made it to the end.
Wow.
I'm a little sad. No, I'm a little sad.
Lynch-vember.
You know?
I know it is a little sad, but the hope is that David Lynch isn't finished. I mean, he is old. He's a very old man at this point, in his 70s, but he's still got a lot of life in him. And I believe in an interview recently, he mentioned that if it weren't for COVID, he would be working on a film or a continuing story, as he calls television.
Right. Which
So there's so much more work for him to do, and I'm sure that he wants to do it, and we're all eagerly awaiting.
Alternatively, he might just keep making carpentry projects, and we all get to watch him on YouTube.
Yeah,
that'll be fun.
You know, his YouTube channel is a bright spot on a cloudy day.
He's a very positive guy.
He is, at the end of the day. For all the talk of his crazy movies, he's quite a jovial man.
Honest, yeah, you wouldn't think, just watching him, you would never imagine he'd make stuff like this, and yet, there it is. It's the collective unconscious at work.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to our David Lynch retrospective. We are now going to move on to new things, although what those new things are, we haven't quite settled on, but just you wait. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be the best thing we've ever done, and you can hold me to that. If it's not, then
I'm going to come after you, Joey, if it's not.
Okay, then Mark's going to come after me.
Yeah, I'll hold him to it, guys.
Good. Fantastic. We'll see you next week.